Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test. We have a really special video for you today. As you guys may know, the advisory circular addressing CBO recognition and also future FRIA development has just been announced. We have been working really hard behind the scenes, and we wanted to give you guys a video that may be a little long, but is also very informative. Not just from us as Flight Test, the FTCA, but also great community members and great partners like the FPVFC, FPV Freedom Coalition, and also Greg from Pilot Institute. We really want to unpack this at all angles to show you how hard we're working behind the scenes to protect the hobby, to grow the hobby, and also to equip you to be able to enjoy the hobby freely. Feel free to watch this. We look forward to your comments, and also we are far from done from this. Really look forward to sharing this video with you. There's a lot of really great people, a lot of really great hearts in it. Let's get to it.
All right. So the purpose of this is just to get together to talk about the recent AC that has been released, to discuss it. We've got three different organizations, actually four different organizations if you include Flight Test as well. We've got the FTCA, we've got Flight Test, we've got FPVFC, and we got Pilot Institute. So each is represented here, and we want to just discuss opinions, concerns, thoughts about the recent AC. Hey, let's roll with it. So we'll start with the first question. I'm going to throw it out to Dave, and just the initial your initial take on the AC that just came out, and any kind of thoughts, concerns, or anything towards it.
Thanks, Lee. Our view is some good, some not so good. It's there are good common sense things in the advisory circular that reflect back to the recreational exception. But then as you peel it back, there are things that tend to get us a little upset, and that has mostly to do with the details in the safety guidelines, and asking a CBO to insist that members of their CBO do things that are complicated and that add a lot of complexity to being a recreational UAS pilot.
Yeah, that was pretty alarming. I liked how Greg said it in his video that there's basically 9 standards that you could go through, 8 or 9 standards, and from that point to the release of this, compliance is everything. Being able to communicate this to a friend on the field as you introduce them to this great hobby is pretty critical to make sure that they adopt that as a lifestyle, not just something to be fearful or give them anxiety and to keep them from getting in this hobby. As they kind of branched out, I noticed being a 103 pilot and then also working for my PPL, a lot of this was kind of just pulled from what it would be to fly a 2-seat manned aircraft, not even an ultralight, to a very, very high standard. And that's definitely important when you're flying manned flight. But when it comes to model aviation, especially recreational model aviation, that is a burden. I don't know if that can be overcome or easily communicated or adopted.
So, if Josh, when you're saying that it's not easily communicated or adopted, I think that one of the things that by watching Greg's video, he brought up was the need for simplicity, and how in the AC and it talks about the comprehensive safety guidelines. So I think, Greg, can you, for those of you that haven't been able to watch your video, can you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, as I read the AC, as I read it first when it was proposed for comments, I read the beginning of it and I was like, oh, this makes sense. Yeah, this makes sense. This is common sense. You get to the first page and you say, okay, this is good. We can add these as guidelines. I think there's 7 items, 7 bullet points that would be added, but most of these are things that people do already. So I don't think it would be much trouble. But then you get to the next page and the next page and the next page, and then you realize, whoa, this is really becoming overwhelming, and even overwhelming for me. And quite frankly, I do this for a living. I can't imagine somebody who just picked up a drone and say, what do I need to do? I mean, we talk to people every single day who said, what do I need to do? Here's the 9 bullet points or 8 bullet points, however you want to call it. And we've made videos about it. And I know you guys have been pushing for those as well. We've made easy handouts for them. Mm-hmm. We've made a simple course for it. It's a 30-minute course. The FAA has made trust. All this is all available right now. And quite frankly, it's working. I don't know why we need to add so much more to make it so complicated that people are just going to disregard and make it harder for them or easier for them to get in trouble. But yeah, I think the list, to answer your question, Lee, I'm sorry I kind of expanded, but
you're fine.
Yeah, to answer your question, I think what happens after these 7 or 8 bullet points in the AC, I think that's just too much. There's just a bit of an overreach, and I think it's going to make things just harder for you, quite frankly, for the CBOs that are going to become CBOs.
Yeah, it's safe to say that both FTCA and FPVFC, we've already applied to be a CBO. We already made sure years ago that we met all the criteria that were defined by Congress, in the original rules. So, that's great. And part of, safety guidelines was in there. And what Greg just talked about was indeed acknowledged and already written for and stuff. And it's part of the application. It's kind of like it's not going to be something that can easily be executed. And if the goal is compliance, and even more so, if the goal is to bring future pilots not only in model aviation, but also into career paths to fix the 640,000+ pilot shortage we're going to have in the next 10 years. You can't take this stuff to a 13, 14-year-old child and say, man, this is a great hobby and it can lead to great paths in the future for you professionally, as a pilot or a mechanic. And these are all the exciting things you can do. All you need to do is make sure that you are properly, healthy, and that you do these post inspections and you file out incident reports. And am I missing anything, Greg?
Oh, there's just so much. I can't even remember all of them. I mean, I had to make a script just to remember everything that was in here. And like you said, I think that the key, and I think I mentioned this in the video, is there's a balance. There's a fine line between overwhelming and just enough information that people are gonna care about it and want to follow it. And like you said, that this is our future for the aviation industry. This is not just the drone industry. This is the aviation industry as a whole. We need to make sure we get these kids interested in flying drones and model aircraft, because they're the ones that are going to be the future pilots. The majority of people you talk to that become pilots, that's what they did as kids. They got interested in this stuff. And I think we're scaring people away. And I hate to say it, but when I read the comments, every single day we get probably about 50 comments on this video every single day right now. And there's not a whole lot of positive comments, unfortunately, of people saying either I'm going to give up, here's a drone for sale, or why would I even get into this? This is just overwhelming.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see that all the time too. From like people, talking with Bardwell's audience and the FPV news when we get comments there and stuff. There's just a lot of people that communicate. Every time we hear about more rules or we talk again about remote ID and stuff, it's just people get overwhelmed. It doesn't take a lot for somebody to get overwhelmed who isn't aware of all this stuff and isn't spending all the time learning about these things. Like Greg said, he can't even remember all the things we listed. And we're doing this all the time. So yeah, it just seems a little crazy. And the other thing is, it almost seems like, it's like, hey, all that stuff that's common sense, let's have you list all of that out in particular, like in addition to all these extra things that we really don't need. And yeah, it just seems like overreach is what I think, kind of, or at least like kind of over the top, it just like seems a little surprising.
100% agree with you. It's really easy to map out. Every Thursday, we teach people how to fly for free. They come out here, and a lot of times people will try to teach themselves, and they're like, okay, I can't figure this out. And they come out here, and something as simple as flight over people. It's so easy to go along next to that person, whether they're 9 years old or 89 years old, and be like, hey, listen, really good practice is to make sure that whenever you're flying your airplane, that you don't fly over people, because if this hits them, it could potentially hurt them. And here's a really good way to prevent that. When the plane is flying towards you, give it about 50 feet. And if it's coming directly towards you and it's a faster plane, give it about 100 feet. And make sure you commit to a turn to the left or the right before that point. And that's going to give you plenty of time to be able to turn away. Now, if you're flying across from you, left to right, you can be 25, 30 feet away, and that's okay. But here's how you can easily avoid flying over people. That's a far different cry from setting up very stringent guidelines and stuff like that, and having visual observers and stuff, and the health of visual observers. I was like, wow. I was talking to Dave in this earlier. And again, this is a flight test. And I know with every one of these organizations, we love people. We love people so much, and we want to get them inspired around flight. So this is not a dig. If we love people, we have to be about safety. And aviation culture is all about safety. The first thing you do before you get an airplane is you pre-flight it. When you put away your airplane, you post-flight. I mean, those are great things, but they do not have to be to the level of what you do with a manned aircraft. And I was talking to Dave and the team earlier. It's like, I drive around a 38-foot RV sometimes. I have a driver's license, and all I had to do to get my driver's license was take a basic driver's course and look through some goggles and have my eyesight confirmed. And I have a driver's license, and I can jump in a vehicle that weighs well over 10,000 pounds and drive at 65 miles an hour down the road with far less restriction than flying what's right over my shoulder, a little tiny airplane this big. And again, this is not an attack on safety or trying to say that we don't need to care about safety. It's an attack on common sense. What's going on here? We gotta shore this up. Because beyond model aviation, there is, as Greg and everyone's agreed, there is a path in STEM. There is a path in career paths that need to be filled right now. So it's not even us advocating about the importance of this hobby, and it is so important. It's about us advocating for the future of flight, and this is a barrier for that.
Yeah, Josh, in addition to what you and Plenty were saying about listing out things that are common sense, we were also concerned there are several items in here that enumerate safety guidelines that are really outside the authority of the FAA, because they're talking about ground operations, and the FAA has authority in the air. So this puts a CBO in a difficult position, because by law, the CBO has to put in place a set of safety guidelines, and members of the CBO or people who choose to utilize those guidelines have to adhere by them. So it's an end run on the FAA's own rulemaking, but it's also rulemaking effectively outside of the authority of the FAA. So there are only a couple of those, and again, it's not that we argue with good pre-flight or good post-flight, but why do we need to put the details down in a set of safety guidelines that people are then required to follow?
Yeah.
Now, on that, sorry, Josh, I want to keep that line going with Dave there just a second. The liability that is thrown to the CBO with their safety guidelines. Do you believe, or just, I mean, opinion, this is open for everybody, like the opinion of, it's almost as if the FAA wants to be able to point a finger if something goes wrong to a CBO that, well, see, that individual did that because the CBO didn't specify X, Y, Z. And there wants to be a scapegoat or someone for blame in a situation. Do you think that that's something that the FAA is trying to do, or?
I think the FAA is less interested in liability. I think we can indemnify ourselves appropriately, but I think they are interested in accountability and enforcement, and they would love to delegate that to a CBO, and so that they want the community-based organization to educate and then insist that people following their guidelines follow the guidelines, and then there is a ramification of violating those guidelines, or a consequence, I should say.
So placing the enforcement, because the FAA doesn't have the manpower to enforce all the rules in which they're imposing, or the regulations in which they're opposing. They want to make the CBO basically their deputized sheriffs, right? Is that what you're saying?
It is. Greg, I saw you agreeing with that. You and that's how you see it as well.
Yeah, and I also think what's happened, and this is just my personal opinion of watching this unfold, is that the FAA has figured out that right now there's a set of open rules that are really easy to follow, 44809, and then there's Part 107, which is the rules for everyone. And if you start digging into the philosophy of these two rules, why do we have different sets of rules for someone who's flying for fun when you have rules for somebody who's not flying for fun? Rules should be based on safety, shouldn't be based on if you're making money with your flight or if you're not making money with your flight. I could be flying personally at a park using either sets of rules, One of them is very overwhelming, Part 107, and one of them is not. The safe completion of the flight is the same. And so what I think is happening is that the FAA is preparing themselves for the uninevitable, which is that somebody is going to put one of these aircraft into an actual aircraft flown by humans, and somebody is going to die, or there's going to be some major damage, and the FAA wants to cover their butt. And I hate to say it this way, but the FAA wants to have and say, well, see, we had a safety guidelines, we had a set of rules that you had to follow, and it's not our fault. Everything was in writing, and it's all right here. And I think that's just them consolidating the rules into making them closer to each other, and basically said, it's not our fault. The rules are there, and we didn't do this. Because right now, 44809 is pretty open. There's a lot of things you can do technically under 44809 if you read the rules correctly, if you take the CBO guidelines out of the way. So that's my personal opinion.
One question I have here, like thinking about this, like as a broader idea, is like why did the FAA put general guidelines forth and have the CBO make the rules instead of like every other time they make some kind of committee, and then a committee come up with rules and then have those be the rules, right? Like that, it seems odd, doesn't it? I mean, is there precedent for this in other like aviation? Are there other like aviation groups who have rules that you follow instead of like the FAA's rules for aviation?
I think Congress is the answer. Congress mandated that the FAA does this. The FAA doesn't really decide on the rules that they make. They're told by Congress about what to do. And I think Congress decided that this is what's going to happen. I don't want to throw the AMA under the bus, but I think the AMA had something to do with the original 44809, the idea to carve out something from Part 107 in order to make it easier for recreational flyers to fly, which is, I don't think, a terrible idea in itself. And I don't think the AMA is behind the CBO guidelines. Let me be clear. I'm not throwing them under the bus for that. But I think the idea of having two sets of rules came from a push from the industry, from the model aviation industry, to make sure there was easier rules to follow for just someone that wants to fly for fun.
Yeah, and along the lines of what you're saying, Greg, is that time and again, we've worked with the FAA, we've worked with the Advanced Aviation Advisory Committee, and they have again and again agreed that one size does not fit all, and that is that rules should be proportionate to the risk. So if I'm flying a tiny whoop and a little tiny drone, or a tiny aircraft that's smaller than 250 grams, the rules should be different than a greater than 55-pound aircraft. And that's appropriate. And unfortunately, I think in this advisory circular, a lot of things are lumped together, and that's it goes away from that philosophy of one size does not fit all.
I agree. I mean, Josh, except for the very crazy aircraft that you guys make, what's the average size you would say for one of your average user for an aircraft?
A kilo.
300 grams, 500 grams, a kilo. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it making? Yeah, is it making sounds that is it making any kind of sense that we have these rules? I like what you said, Dave. It's all based on the type of operation. This is how we should be looking at guidelines and rules. But we've lumped everything under 55 pounds. A drone that's 250 grams and a drone that's 55 pounds. There's a lot of difference there, and we all know this. Well, and yeah.
And this is where, so many times we've talked about listening to the science of things. Why in the world are we not saying, okay, let's take a step back and let's do a study on a safe flight test. Our CBO is going to recommend or represent predominantly people that build foam board aircraft that fly in their backyards and in parks and in areas that are inviting for smaller, slower, lighter aircraft. There's a very easy way to do a study on the potential damage and the kinetic energy that an aircraft of our size carries versus a 55-pound turbine jet that flies at 140 miles an hour. I absolutely agree. When you carry something that has the mass to be able to take a life, that there should be the ability to assess that differently than what an overwhelming majority. And let me just add this: is Flight Test has done a job. Again, throwing no shade at AMA here. We have done an incredible job at bringing people from all walks of life, all demographics, boys, girls, men, women, everywhere, to be able to get into this great hobby affordably. That's being limited where it never was. It was always a problem where you had to be of means, you had to have a certain ability and have a certain environment to get in this hobby. We've made it for everybody now. And now when we've just been able to do this and have wild success from it, it's getting taken away through rules that are going to inhibit those very people that are now benefiting from it. And a light aircraft that's made out of foam board, guess what? If you're building it, you know how to repair it. If you crash it, you know how to fix it. All those things are addressed with the way, especially I'm speaking from flight tests, not everybody. All those things are addressed in our build videos. All those things are addressed in how we engage the community. To take that away now is a huge disservice, and to do that without doing the science and saying what is the true damage that a plane flying at 25, 30 miles an hour that weighs a kilo can really do to a manned aircraft, to a person, to a car, to fill in the blank. I think the reality that they would find very quickly is it's not an issue. A seagull, I think, has more potential to do damage to an airplane than one of our flight test models. And I would like to see the science, or have the opportunity to prove that through the science, to put that to bed. But I do see a desire where if it's above 250 grams, it's basically the same as a 55-pound turbine jet flying at 120 miles an hour.
And
that only serves you well if, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Josh. I was going to say, we see Europe, for example, is working on something to those lines where they have weight categories of aircraft. To me, that makes a lot more sense as an approach rather than just one single weight that's so wide.
Yeah, one of the approaches that we've advocated and the AAC advocated was a target level of safety, which takes the what's the right word, Alex? Is it frangible? The ability of an aircraft to fold up and crunch and absorb energy. And so we see Google Wing take this to heart, and the fuselage of their delivery aircraft is foam. So it would design so it cannot hurt people. So I think there's better science, and we like target level of safety as a way to do it. It's a better than just weight, better than kinetic energy, which is 1/2 mv squared. I know that's ingrained in Alex's memory as an engineering student.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Josh. You were talking about the standards and needing to test stuff, and I believe the way we use the data right now is strictly the generic numbers. There's no actual testing. It's just like if there is, it's really old, and I think it's like a falling piece of metal or something, if I recall that correctly. Yeah,
you're absolutely right, and it's a crazy thing. I think there is wisdom in having different CBOs represent the hobby. At PVFC, you guys have a niche of pilots that have a certain passion for freestyle, FPV flying, race quads. That demographic's probably never going to go much above the trees, are they? They're the way they're flying. So there should be the ability for the community-based organization to say, this is the community we represent, and these are the most practical, applicable safety guidelines we can give them, because this is their activities they do, and we know their risks because we represent them. And so therefore we're going to put these in FAA. We need your trust to be able to represent them. And time will tell whether those are good rules or bad rules. Same thing with FTCA is we know our community. We know the diversity within it. We know the people we represent, the models that they're flying, because we provide them with the kits and the instruction to do so. And because of that, here's the guidelines that we'll represent that are easy for them to adopt, and then time will tell. AMA clubs, there's a whole different realm of much heavier aircraft, faster aircraft. I could understand why they'd want to have different rules for that. Give the AMA the freedom to design the rules to represent, again, their community. And you may even find a pilot grows from the flight test community to the FPVFC community, and then said, "Man, I love these big boys. Let's go to an AMA club." Like, we're not all carving out our piece of the pie. We all represent something we love so dearly, and that's flight. Let us be able to usher one relationship to the other. And Greg, I hope with all my heart that these people, these young kids that we're engaging from all walks of life, I want to see them behind the controls of an aircraft or working on an aircraft or doing what I get to do every day, which I'm so passionate about. I want to see them get there. The reason it frustrates me so much is because I see roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And this is something that's not only going to hurt people being compliant, but it's also going to hurt the future of flight. And that hurts everybody.
Yep, I agree. And, so I wanted to bring up a topic because there's been a lot of confusion from people watching at least our channel. And I would like you guys to explain. So here's the question that we get quite often. am I going to have to choose a different CBO depending on where I'm flying? If I go fly in Washington State as opposed to flying in Florida, am I going to have to find a local CBO? And I think a lot of people are confused with what an actual CBO means. So I always tell them, hey, this is going to be they could be local CBOs, but I think more than likely it's going to be a nationwide group. But maybe we can have a discussion about what we think CBOs are going to look like and explain. And also the other thing that I would like to talk about is the cost of accessing the guidelines, because a lot of people have questions. I don't want to join the AMA. I don't want to pay a fee in order to do this. I want to be able to do this from my house. So I think there's a bit of a disconnect in the understanding of what a CBO is and how people are going to select a guideline.
Lee, you want me to start with that?
Yeah, go ahead. I've got a few things I want to touch on too about that, but yeah, take it away, David.
So the first is that it's important that you do not have to be a member of a CBO in order to use that CBO's safety guidelines.
Mhm.
So our safety guidelines will be published, and they're out there. They're published today. If they get approved, then we'll be a CBO, and then anyone can pick those up. There is a suggestion by the FAA in the advisory circular that they anticipate that there will be safety guidelines that are specific to a discipline. So if I'm flying if I'm just FPV racing, I'll look for a CBO that's doing just FPV racing, and the safety guidelines will be tailored for me, and that's a positive. And our view of the FPVFC safety guidelines is they will come at no cost. There is no paywall for the information that we produce. Lee, back to you.
Yeah, so we're in direct connection with that. Like, so at the FTCA, we do have paid membership and non-paid membership, but the paid membership is not to access safety guidelines. So when we are approved or recognized as a CBO, anyone who just like you said, wants to abide by those safety guidelines, they can. I think it's kind of along the lines, and forgive me for my analogy, but it's kind of along the lines of church. Like, so that's my background. And to be a member of a church, you don't have to be a member of a church to go into worship at a place of worship. But there's a level in which, okay, if you want to be a part of that church, you become a member, and then you have other benefits. I think that's kind of the same way as we look at like the FTCA. You don't have to be a member to come and fly or use our safety guidelines, but if you do become a member, there are added benefits that go with that. And I also think that it's important, like the way in which we structure our safety guidelines is not. At first, it seemed like it was very event oriented, but then we adjusted them, modified them so that they can be used nationwide. It's not you have to be in a specific place for a specific time to do this. So I think that is definitely important as we're going through all this, that people understand that you do have options, and I think that options are good, but I do believe that if you're going to pick an option. I mean, and that's where the pilots need to be able to make that choice. And back to what Greg was saying is it's got to be an easy choice. And I like the different disciplines. Like, there's definitely, if there is a quad pilot that wants to do racing in FPV, I mean, they're going to probably want to go more FPVFC versus FTCA, which is totally fine. And that's, it goes to another point, which I wanted to bring up or expound on, like what you guys are saying, is that the fact of working together has to be highlighted. Like Josh said, no one CBO or one company, organization, whatever, think that they've got the market cornered and then push everyone out. I mean, we know that there are entities that want to try to do that, but we can't let that happen, especially when it comes to the CBO, because there's, it's the different disciplines that make up the variety and really it's the eclectic nature of aviation to be able to go to different, into different fields that is going to keep the aviation industry alive.
Yeah, well said. We're not owners of relationships, and CBOs should be farthest from that. We should be stewards of relationships and seizing the opportunity when people are passionate about flight to give them what they need. And we are 100% committed to making sure that knowledge and that ability is given freely to anyone that wants it. And that's for anyone from any CBO. I know we're going to be, one of the most popular things that got a lot of people in was our beginner series. We're redoing that beginner series, but we're also redoing the beginner series of how trainers can train because we're really good at it. We bring a lot of people in the hobby incredibly quickly. That's not going to be held within FTCA or flight test. That's going to be freely given for the AMA or FPVFC or any other CBO that wants to use that, because the end goal from a good CBO should be the same thing: to celebrate the safe practice of flight. And that's what I'm a little concerned about with some of these rules and everything. Is it kind of, from a far out perspective, it seems like if anyone's willing to abide by this and give us what we ask, we'll approve you. And Congress gave some very basic standards that if you meet these, you should be able to become a CBO. My concern is what you said, Dave, 90 days to review these?
No.
I'm concerned, if I'll just say it,
that means
if we've done
120
everything
days.
2 years ago, quicker than this whole thing even came out, to abide by these rules and make sure we have everything ready to go. And then if we're not willing to do the bidding, for lack of better words, we're not going to be approved. That is a huge disservice to this hobby. And it's a huge disservice to the communities we represent already. And things like trust, like we need to be able to have the freedom to be able to engage our community to get the compliance that they already have out there. To clip the wings is going to just destroy the whole thing. I don't want to jump around too much, but one thing that's been really on my heart is this whole FRIAs. Do we have bandwidth to really kind of unpack FRIAs, or have we kind of gone through the safety guidelines enough?
No, we can definitely do that. But can I make one last comment on what we're talking about here before we move on? And that is in the AC chapter 3. It's 3.1.1, and it's the third bullet there as what the criteria is for a CBO. It just really stands out to me. It's the mission of which is demonstrably the furtherance of model aviation. So if we're to demonstrate how we can further the model aviation, and it again goes back to what Greg said, it's simplicity that furthers anything in it. I mean, even when it comes down to science and the physics and all that other stuff, there are simple steps that are involved so that the complicated can happen. And if we make the beginning aspect of it so complicated, there's not going to be any furtherance of the model aviation. So
Lee, may I add one closing comment on the CBO stuff?
Absolutely.
And that is that we've mentioned that FTCA and FPVFC have both applied to be community-based organizations, and so the FAA has said that it'll take them less than 90 days to respond. And so if they respond with that yes, you're both approved to be CBOs, and the guidelines that you put forward, steeped in common sense as well as reflecting the existing regulations, then I think we're good. If, on the other hand, we start an iteration of, oh, no, you need to refine those and add all of the complexity in that we've been talking about, then we have an issue. Then we know we know what we have going forward. So in terms of what to watch for as pilots or operators, it's watch this space. We'll be communicating what the response is from the FAA on our applications to become CBOs.
Can I also, one more thing, which is a fear of mine. We have FTCA, which is going to represent the smaller fixed wing aircraft. We have the Freedom Coalition, which is going to represent FPV pilots. The AMA, which, like you said, is going to be probably for larger model aircraft. The fear that I have at the moment is there is no group in place for what I would consider the majority of aircraft flying in the air that are remote control, which is quadcopters, multi-rotors. And I think there's going to be a lot of confusion when it comes time for the average person that has a DJI drone, an Autel drone, or whatever it is, to pick guidelines, because there's going to be very specific guidelines. I wonder if you guys have any idea of how we can help with that by maybe having guidelines in your own guidelines regarding multi-rotors that are not FPV, let's put it this way.
Yeah, there's very little that is FPV specific in our guidelines. It is much more drone related, and it's what to do, what's safe, what's common sense, and then we refer outside of the guidelines. What do you do, to need to get ready, and what are the two big common sense safety issues: propellers and batteries, and those are absolutely applicable to DJI videographer.
Yeah.
And we know, like, the
Go ahead,
FPV
Monty.
view doesn't, the FPV view doesn't count as visual line of sight. So, like Dave said, there's just, there's not a lot that can be that specific, I think, because of FPV. So there are some specific pieces, but there's just a lot of generalization for quadcopters because you're almost under the same rules as someone who didn't have the goggles on, except you can't see, so it's even worse.
Yeah.
And the ones that are FPV specific are usually called out separately. They're it's not like this is the bullet point and it's just FPV. It's the overall quadcopter, and then if you're flying FPV, then this too.
Right. Well said.
So that's common.
Yeah, I definitely see working with Dave closely over the past couple of years too. Is FPVFC has done a great job. So if someone goes to Best Buy and they buy a DJI product and stuff, FPVFC is going to have a great way to communicate to them, inform them, educate them to keep them safe. And on our side, we obviously teach people to fly both fixed wing and multi-rotor. So the flight training aspect, we again, it's not an either or, it's an and. Hopefully there'll be a level of fluidity where people go from different CBOs as they grow in this hobby. And I think between the FPVFC and FTCA, we easily cover all the requirements and needs that those people have. It'll just be us having the mechanism to be able to get out in front. So when someone buys a DJI drone at Best Buy, there's a QR code or a landing page that can come and say, hey, here's the different CBOs that can help you have a safe, good experience with your product.
And
Josh,
a perfect segue to FRIA. Now,
yeah,
they know where they want to fly. So you wanted to start some points about a FRIA?
Yeah. FRIAs are mixed feelings on FRIAs. Mm-hmm. Again, if we're going to have the inclusion that we need and the diversity we need to get people into this hobby where everyone can get it, the burden of remote ID has to be addressed. That was addressed through FRIAs. If I'm going to remember correctly, the name federally recognized identification areas. Did I get that right?
Almost. FAA recognized.
FAA recognized.
I made the same mistake before.
I've done that publicly so many times. Acronyms are not my strong suit, but this gives people the freedom to be able to fly amateur built, non-remote ID equipped aircraft. I think it's incredibly important, especially as we go. You're going to hear me say STEM so many times. It's not a tagline. It's a passion of mine because it would have changed my life if I had it in school. And it changed my life after I was out of college and I got this opportunity here. It needs to start in school. And I just picture these FRIAs in these locations where people are learning to get in the hobby. They need to have those barriers removed. A FRIA can provide that. And that's already going to be a burden for people to adopt the idea of where they once were able to fly in their backyards and now they can't unless they have a FRIA. We want to make that as easy as possible. So again, compliance is there. And I saw a little bit of language shift in the FRIAs, which was a little bit concerning. Now it seems, and Greg, maybe you can help explain this. There's two different recognizations or two different categories of FRIAs.
Well, there's a FRIA and there's a fixed site.
Fixed site.
Yeah.
Right.
So fixed sites have always existed in a way. Fixed sites are if you want to get a special approval to fly inside of controlled airspace, then you can get a fixed site, and that's typically for groups that want to be able to fly. So I'll give you an example. I used to work at a university that was within Class Delta airspace, and then we had a community there, a local flying club that had a fixed site approval. So they were able to fly higher than the grid numbers inside of the Class D airspace. We were limited to 50 feet. They actually had approval to 200 feet under their fixed site authorization. So that's still going to be in place. I think that has a different, and FRIAs are different approval than than fixed sites as far as
Okay.
the FAA is
Yeah.
concerned. Both they could be a FRIA inside of a fixed site, but they could be individual approval for each. And then, but the FRIA in themselves are solely recognized for remote ID purposes. So they're going to be a location where you can fly without remote ID. Now the kicker is if you have a drone with remote ID, it's still going to be broadcasting remote ID because you can't turn that off. So if you go to a FRIA, it doesn't mean that you get to turn it off. It just means, because we've had that question a couple of times already.
Right.
This is not something you'll be able to turn on or off on your drone. Remote ID is going to be, especially if you have a standard remote ID, I should say.
Right.
Drone.
Well, let me ask this question then, Greg. Maybe you or anybody else can answer it. So our location that we have here at Edgewater is different than the location that we have for Flight Fest each year. So in essence, are we going to have a FRIA there in the other location as well as here? And is that FRIA going to be a for the whole duration? Is it going to be treated just like every other FRIA, or is there a time frame, like you say, from this date to this date, this event's going to happen, like an event FRIA? Is that something?
I think
There
Dave can answer that question better than I can.
Yeah, we asked for, and again and again and again, and thanks to Alex, he hosted an event with Administrator Dixon, where Administrator Dixon committed to a young man that we'll take care of you in FPV racing, and unfortunately, the FAA has not. So the only event capability they have is for fixed sites. There is no FRIA. And that's a real shame for FPV racers who every gram counts. So adding a remote ID broadcast module to an FPV racing aircraft is a problem. So that's an area that we'll work with.
Yeah,
That's really
the good news
disheartening.
is. I was going to say the good news is sub 250 for recreational purposes, you won't need remote ID. I think that might be at least for racing, that might be a solace. But I think for your event, if you're going to be flying a larger drone and you don't have FRIA status, then you're going to have to put a module on top of it in order to fly it legally and broadcast remote ID.
Okay. Alex is on multi-GP on the officer, and he's also a ranked pilot. So you want to react to that, Alex?
So at least putting a remote ID module, my main issue, not as much the weight, is the room it will take up. That's the big issue, as well as sub 250 for racing. The current standard is open class, and most of those weigh about maybe anywhere from 400 to 600 grams. So there's some that are starting to do around 250, but even then it's really close, and it's not much of a difference. And the standard is currently that 5-inch open class, about 400 to 500 grams. And that's what everyone's currently doing. So to try to put a module on there when there's no room and it's extra weight that has no benefit to the race, then and could hurt your performance, then and when we're especially below tree lines or not, I think the highest gate at the championship this year was 30 feet tall, and we weren't going above it. We were going maybe a foot below 30 feet at the maximum. And I don't know of any aircraft that flew anywhere near that event other than racing drones. And then to get a rapid FRIA, a lot of these races aren't at fixed sites. I guess I should use fixed sites for that, but they're not at a permanent location. So it changes all the time.
They need to be set up. Blunty, I'm
So
sorry. I stepped on you earlier.
That's fine. That's what I was going to say too.
Dave, is there anything in the regulation that says that you can't apply for a temporary FRIA at a temporary location for a specific event?
No, there's nothing excluding it, but there's it implies that they want it to be a permanent location, and there's also our biggest concern with it. So we've now changed gears from the advisory circular on the CBO, which is 91-57C, to the advisory circular on FRIAs, which is 89-3. And section 7.5 in that document talks about the need for the FRIA in the proposed location or proximity of other FRIAs. So we know that if a racing event is close to some other location, that the FAA has said that they'll take that into consideration to reject the second request. And this whole 7.5 troubles us a lot. We don't see why can't we proliferate FRIAs around the country if they're complying with all of the documentation and the safety guidelines and everything else. What's the issue? So
I would say it's also concerning because, they don't tell you what the intended purpose and need should be.
yes,
It literally just says the FAA will assess the applicant's intended purpose and need. And that seems the most discretionary. You can't get more discretionary than that.
Yeah. And what happens if you have someone that's assessing that doesn't buy into your activity of flight or doesn't
100%.
appreciate it?
And
it's too subjective. It should be, do you meet these criteria? I mean, Lance did a really good job for 107 pilots to be able to get immediate approval without burdening the tower or the local airport with that. I remember back when we were calling Akron Canton Airport all the time saying, hey, we're going to be doing flight activity here. They're like, listen, we know you're there. We know what you're doing. Stop calling us. We're tired of hearing from you. We get it. And then we got our 1 mile by 1 mile by 400 foot block of space that we never even needed all of. It would be really nice to have something that takes the emotion out of it because that will protect it. Now, I remember back when the first proposed NPRM thing came out, they were talking about FRIAs only being open for like a year.
Yes.
And then that being closed. Has that been, and I know we talked heavily against that. Has that been?
yeah,
that's
it's
resolved.
4
It's
Another
4
year
years
now.
4 years and can be approved. And there in the NPRM, there was a window for which you had to apply, and then you could never apply. And then it said that the objective was to do away with FRIAs. That's all gone. So it's now you can continually apply for a new FRIA. It has a 4-year duration at which time it must be renewed.
Also, just for reference, if you get denied, you can reapply immediately with their, trying to fix it too. So
good point.
Is there in this process, is there points of why you were denied, and also can they just say you're denied, try again, or is it?
It says
A little
It says
bit.
they will include the reason for denial. That's
Okay.
what it says. They'll send you back a form with the reason for denial. One thing I was wondering is this something you can Freedom of Information Act, and find out hey, what was their paperwork like? What did their emails look like? What were they discussing? When they talked about why was this actually denied? Because we talked about with. One thing I worry about a lot is oversight here, because there's some person at a computer reviewing this most likely, and I just wonder how much is really going to go into that, and what really are the guidelines they're going to use. Do they have an internal document we don't get to see that says how they decide these things? Do they have a big roundtable discussion where they decide here's how we should do this moving forward? They've got to have something like this, unless it's completely discretionary. So, yeah, it would be nice to have more information for sure.
It also sounds similar to how they do 107 waivers too, where you're assigned a FAA
True.
agent or person official, and they look through your application, and then they're the one who also decides, and it just depends on the day who you get as the person looking over the same application. Could get approved or denied just on the person.
Right.
Yeah.
So is there a guarantee that your application will be reviewed, approved, or denied within a certain amount of time? I'm hoping it's not 90 days, because that could be very disastrous.
I don't think the 90 days is a guarantee. It's just an estimate time, because that's the same thing with 107 waivers. Is they'll try to get back to you in 90 days, but it's not a guarantee that they will.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
imagine.
They
you're
said
able-
they said they were going to get this AC done in 1 year, so it took 4 years. So your days may not be.
Well, and here's what's concerning is, imagine you have a group of schools and they want to do quad racing. We're having tremendous success with that. And suddenly they need to pick a school and they want to have their FRIA there, and it's over 250 grams. So they need to have a FRIA established. So these schools can get together and race quads or fly race wings or build airplanes together and fly together or do their experiments. And suddenly now the only thing hanging up that opportunity, which is good on all aspects, is someone approving a FRIA. I think all emotion should be stripped from a FRIA. It should be, is it safe? Does it meet these criteria? Yes or no? Boom. And what really also concerns me is if a dad and his daughter want to fly in their backyard and they want to truly comply to the rules of the FAA to the best of their ability, and there is a club field down the road, and they're denied because of that club field, but maybe they don't have the financial means for the dad and the daughter to be able to join that club, or maybe that club's not friendly to dads and daughters, or maybe fill in the blank. Maybe they don't appreciate that type of flying. Now you have one entity preventing another entity from enjoying flight, and they should not have that freedom to do so. So again, that's a lot of concerning things. I mean, the high level view could be all healthy things that could be easily communicated, but they need to be easy to apply. And without the science proving why it's dangerous, this is kind of grasping at straws.
I can't see any reason they would include that part about you can't have it near another FRIA. They just don't want the paperwork, right? Like, there's no other point.
Like, I see that as going back to your high school idea, or your schools having a racing team. If you have a county that wants to have a series and a competition added as a sport to one of their teams, there are some counties I know have schools that are 5 minutes away from each other. Are those schools going to have to practice together then?
Great
or
point.
And then decide who's going to go at what time? Because I know when I did swim team, there were 2 schools in my counties that had swimming pools, and we had to, and the slots were filled back to back, and you had to be there and out in a certain amount of time. And do we want that for other locations where you can only use it for this much time, and then you're out of here and you can't use it again?
Especially when there's no like safety or logical reason for it. You know, I think that's the problem. If there was some like reasoning other than paperwork or effort or whatever it is, right? I think that's the issue.
You know?
And then,
go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say they're few minutes. There's a couple of flying fields that's 30 minutes away from each other. Is that considered a few minutes drive? Because I know for me, that's not a bad drive. 30 minutes. I'll go there and come back, fly for a day.
It's again where the discretionary thing comes in, right? Because now it's up to somebody who's deciding. A few minutes is not established a value, you know. So.
And I think it's definitely going to be discriminating against people that really want to be able to get in the hobby that weren't able to do so beforehand. I remember I had a conversation with a local, the town I grew up in, Alliance. They had a park that didn't have much activity, and they had tremendous success with making skate parks in different locations to bring what they didn't want on the general streets to a central location that was really good. They're like, hey, we have another park, and we heard that you guys are doing this flying, and I did a demonstration at the local library, and they're like, we would love to give you access to this park to make a flying field and to hold this activity. I could see this FRIA if it's, here's something that's open to the public, and then down the road is a membership-driven AMA club. Well, could that inhibit the park from becoming a place where people could freely fly and enjoy this hobby, and for schools to use? And let's just fill in the 5 other blanks, because now there's a membership-driven, expensive solution, and now they're going to force people to either buy into that and pay that CBO or not get to do it at all. Again, they're putting up more hurdles than they're taking down, and I think that's just a disservice to them and to us. And without clarity, like, why in the world was that sentence even put in there? You're absolutely, I think, Blunty, you mentioned that. Like, that was really concerning to me that they said that. It's like, there has to be something more behind it, and it's not good, especially for the real world things that we're already talking to people about, from schools to parks to fill in the blank. So,
even with along with the few minutes apart, there's 2 fields that I know of that are 30 minutes away from each other. Half the time, there's a few times of the year where the one field is under a TFR due to the president going to Camp David, but I can fly at the other one. If only, say, that's the one that's approved as a FRIA, I can't go to the other one that's also right there that is open, but I can't use the FRIA because it's under TFR.
Very much.
And even a discretionary thing isn't going to figure that out. You know, they're not going to see there's a temporary TFR there sometimes. That's not something, that's not data, right? Like, so, yeah.
And all those things are addressed in the trust. You know, you take the trust test, you learn about those things. I mean, you learn about it in, Greg, your video is how many minutes?
For trust?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
like 30 minutes. I mean,
Yeah.
trust in itself is about 30 minutes long. I think most people do it in 15.
Yeah, so you could learn everything we're talking about to address these issues and something that's already established. In 30 minutes of your time, you can have all the basic knowledge you need to be a safe, competent pilot. That can take away a lot of these issues that are now getting more complicated because of FRIAs and overextending, safety guidelines for
But
it.
you
So,
know, even we talk about trust, but I'm looking and pulling the data right now. Something as simple as trust, which is free, which is just something that you do in 15 to 30 minutes. We've only issued 257,000 trusts. This is from the FAA website right now,
Yeah.
as it's updated. Well, it was updated in May. They've been slacking. It probably is closer to, at the rate at which we've been doing ours, probably closer to 300,000 now. But even if you think 300,000 trust certificates compared to how many people actually fly drones, it's actually a small part of the population. We've been having a hard time giving away something for free that you can do with videos, and that is required by law. What makes us think that adding all that complexity is going to make it easier for people to do this?
yeah, beautifully said.
Well
I mean,
said.
we have a good idea. We have 2 million subscribers on our YouTube channel. Well over half of those people are active pilots. And I think that corresponds directly with what the FAA reports to the number of pilots nowadays. That's well, five times more than the current AMA. How in the world are you going to engage these people and get them to comply? As quickly as we're growing, we can bookend this if we have simple common sense things that as they learn how to fly, they get taught about safety, they get taught about where to fly, where not to fly, all common sense.
Yep, there's
all
a
this
there's
stuff
a 500,000 drone registered right now, as per those numbers. There used to be 1 million. Now there is only 500,000 because I think people are not re-registering. But
Yeah.
think about 500,000 to 1 million, and we've done only 250,000 trust certificates. Then we're falling short, and there's a reason for it. I think just making it too complicated.
We estimate the population of recreational UAS in the United States somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 million aircraft. So one way to tie this together is that I don't think we mentioned. The FRIA, the FAA recognized identification area, the application for that has to be performed by a CBO, by a community-based organization. One of the reasons we're so intent, both the FTCA and FPVFC, to become CBOs is we'll be the organization submitting those FRIAs. So if you're wondering, why do I really care? What's the link here between those two? That's it. So I think circling back to the CBO piece, we're concerned. Some of it's good. There are a fair number of pieces that we're very worried about, and the acid test will be how the FAA responds in the 90 days to our applications, plural, to our safety guidelines.
Well said. Let's start wrapping it up. Anybody else have any other closing comments or anything they want to share before we sign off?
We've talked about a lot of scary things. One thing I'm actually really excited about is this is the first opportunity for a formal recognition of multiple interests of the hobby to be represented in a very focused way. I think that's actually a good thing because oftentimes when you're younger, you ask, what's model aviation like? There was a very narrow picture painted verbally by that person or what they understood of the hobby. I think now with all the aspects of the hobby and the freedom for different CBOs to recognize and represent those people very well, I think that's a very healthy thing. I think that'll also change how the hobby's looked at, how it's integrated into schools, into people's lives, to the families. So I'm excited about that. I've been very impatient, past 2 years waiting for this, and now it's here. And there seems like another level of concerns. I really hope a lot of these are addressed and that, common sense prevails so we can really get an opportunity to do our jobs as CBOs and to grow the world of flight.
Yeah, I will add to this. I think, like you said, this may sound scary to a lot of people, but we gotta keep working with the FAA as much as we don't always agree with them, and continue to make sure that they understand the common sense approach. And I think you guys are doing a really good job at doing this. I know you're in constant contact with them and trying to guide them. And quite frankly, I always tell people there's two types of FA. There is the FA as an entity, as a government entity, and then there's the people working at the FA. And I think a lot of them do understand the employees of the FA. It's often the machine in itself that's having a hard time to grasp their hand around drones. But I think we have a lot of people at the FA that understand all this and are trying to make the change, and sometimes can be as frustrated as we are about the machine not working super well.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Anybody else? No? All right. Well, hey, thanks for sitting down with us. And as those of you that are watching this, we'll do more of these, so you have ample opportunity to see what's going on behind the scenes, see how we're working together, and see that we are not only advocating for the hobby individually, but we have a joint effort. And this is just a small group of us. The group is much larger. So until next time, we'll see you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Guys.